All right, so I'm going to introduce to you guys this evening. First off, welcome to Caliber Autism Care's first webinar. Woo! I'm naturally like this. I work with kids for a living, been doing it for 6 years, so I am definitely that person who's bubbly, energetic. What you see is what you get. I am the clinical director for Caliber Autism Care. I love what I do. Been a BCBA for almost 4 years, been in the field for about 6 years. Have worked with a variety of children diagnosed with autism or autistic, whatever one you prefer. And honestly, it's been nothing short but a blessing. I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about kids. And in that process, I joined an autism group just to learn more about the population I work with. And I met Amy. Amy is an adult who has autism herself. She is a school psychologist, and on top of that, she's a homeschooling mom / consultant. So this evening, she is super excited, at least that's what I believe.
Oh, no.
Super excited to share just some tips with you, especially right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. It hasn't been apparent, in which that we don't know whether to send our kids to school, whether to keep them at home, whether we don't know what to do. And if you're homeschooling them, then what is the most effective way to homeschool your child who has autism, who may struggle to sit down, who may struggle to just attend? Like, how do you engage them? How do you interact with them? How do you teach them the ABCs? Is it the time to teach them the ABCs? So with that being said, Amy this evening is going to touch base on all those different things. Feel free to use the Q&A feature in front of you. Feel free to either put your question also in the chat if that's what you prefer. She will stop to answer questions as she goes along, but more so we will have definitely a Q&A session at the end. No question is too big or too small. Amy's very, very knowledgeable, but if she doesn't have an answer for you tonight, she will find an answer for you. That is guaranteed. So without further ado, I introduce to you Amy Bodkin. Yay!
Thank you very much. I am very excited to be here, and I've really enjoyed getting to talk with Frederica because we have a lot in common. We both work with small children and enjoy being bubbly. So one of the big questions I get from parents most frequently is, who can homeschool? Can I homeschool? And the answer I like to give people is that anyone who wants to, generally speaking, can homeschool. So it's a matter of whether or not you want to. There are tools out there to work with just about anything that you need to. And quite honestly, being a homeschool parent, it's not about being a teacher. It's about being a facilitator. And as your child's parent, you have spent their entire lives facilitating for their needs, whether that's making sure they have food, shelter, clothing, friends, doctor's appointments, therapies, whatever. That's been your job, and you've done a great job at that so far. Homeschooling is just taking that a step forward, one more step, and facilitating educational needs. So even if you aren't a good teacher, that's okay. I am not a good teacher. I am a much better facilitator. So it's a matter of finding the right tools, teachers, things that your child can connect with to grow and learn. And so that's all it really takes. In Michigan specifically, for those of you that are in Michigan, it's really pretty easy. You have an option where you're able to really just teach a couple subjects, and as long as you're teaching them, it's okay. Most of the other United States are pretty easy like that. Some countries are rather restrictive, so it kind of depends on where you are, but you can easily find that online. One thing I do like to tell people, especially now that we're in a pandemic, a lot of times people go, oh, you're talking about homeschooling. Well, or do you not like public schools, or do you not like private schools? Education is like having a baby. At the end of the day, we want to have a baby, okay? We don't care how we get there so long as at the end of the day, we have a baby. So we want to educate our children. We do not care how it happens so much so long as at the end of the day, they're getting what they need to grow. And that's our goal. So, you know, if you want to homeschool this year, great. If you don't want to homeschool again after this year, great. If you want to homeschool and then send them to private school and then send them to public school, great. It does not matter. What my job is I work with families to help them understand what their options are and what the advantages are. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the advantages. One of the biggest advantages we have with homeschooling is that you have more freedom and flexibility with homeschooling than any other option. And when you have freedom and flexibility, then you have the opportunity to provide your child with the best education that you can possibly provide for them. In public schools, we have to work within a system. I worked in public schools and I've worked with private schools. Both of them have systems, public schools especially. And in a public school, you are guaranteed a free and appropriate education within the United States. Appropriate is defined by the government, not by you. So that does not mean the best education necessarily in your mind. And so that's one of the advantages that we have. There's advantages to having systems too. But most autistic adults will tell you that they prefer homeschooling. There are some that don't, but by and large, most of them prefer homeschooling. And one of the reasons is that you get to control the environment. So you can learn without being in sensory overload the entire time. You can work in a schedule that works for you. You can learn in the way that you learn. When I went to school, I would go to school all day, get sensory overload, come home and explode at my mother. And then I would have to calm down and do homework most of the night because I had to relearn everything that was taught that day in school because they didn't teach it the way that I learned. And it was a real struggle for me. And so that's part of the reason why we decided to homeschool our kids. We started homeschooling them from the very beginning, just pretty much as soon as I realized that they were a lot like me, because it's a lot of work. I've always told the kids, if you want to go to public schools, you want to go to private school, whatever, we'll make that happen. But you've got to be willing to do the work. I'm not going to make you because you're the one who has to do the work. And you've got to be willing to put in that kind of effort. It's a lot of work. The other thing I get asked about a lot is social skills. How is my child going to be socialized if they're homeschooled? So this is one of my favorite questions. So when was the last time you were in a classroom or a structured setting with all people exactly your same age? Probably high school. Maybe before that. It's not a very generalizable skill. It's not one you're going to need a lot over and over again. But when was the last time you went to the grocery store? All right, maybe before the pandemic, but when was the last time you went to the post office? When was the last time you interacted with somebody who was a different age from you? A child, an older adult. You do that all the time. Those are skills that you're going to need your entire life. And those are skills that you learn outside of a school setting. We learn about those by going with our parents' places or going to the park and playing with a bunch of other homeschooled kids that are all different ages because they're there with their parents because they're not divided up by age groups. You learn about it by going to different types of activities. And the really awesome thing is that because you're not doing it all day, you can do little bite-sized bits. So you're not trying to learn a social skill while you're in sensory overload and exhaust yourself. So you can do it when you've got all the skills necessary to be able to be successful. Being successful really helps us feel more confident and to be able to grow better. And so that's another big advantage we have. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to educate a child, and I'm not saying that any of them are not good, but there are certain advantages to homeschooling. So that said, I told you that with my job is to help parents see what the options are out there and to then empower them to feel like they know what tools to use and how to use them. I work at a company called A Charlotte Mason Plenary. It's a homeschool company, and we have a handout that y'all are going to be getting later, and it's going to have a discount code too on it, because you deserve a little prize for coming. A Charlotte Mason Plenary is a homeschool company, but it is named after an educational philosopher. Part of my graduate school education, I had to read about different educational philosophers. Charlotte Mason was not one of the ones I learned about, but she is my absolute favorite. She lived in England and around the 1800s, early 1900s. And what I loved the most about what she taught was that children are people. Now, you'd think that that's pretty foundational and that you wouldn't need to say that. But if you think about it, that's really where we have to start. Because how many times do kids say things like, well, no one cares what I think, I'm just a kid? You've heard that. And how often, more so, do special needs kids sometimes get treated less than typical kids? So that's really most important, seeing a child as a person. And part of that is because children have to do their own work in learning. We like to think that we're able to actually do it for them, because then it makes us feel more in control and like we're able to do something. In reality, we can't make them learn. We can give them the opportunities. We can provide them with the best environment. We can provide them with the best support suited to them, but we can't do it for them. And so because of that, we've got to honor who the child is and see them as a person. My other favorite thing about Charlotte Mason's philosophy is one of the things she said about parents, specifically moms, because she was talking to a lot of moms. She said that mothers are able to work wonders when they believe that wonders are required of them. And I think that that applies really well to special needs moms. I mean, how many times have you heard, you know, special needs moms do better research than the FBI? True story. Moms will do whatever they can to try to help their kids. And probably dads too, but moms are the ones that we talk about all the time. So with that said, I want to tell you a little bit about how I approach homeschooling with special needs. And if you have burning questions, go ahead and start asking them, and I will answer them. I like to take a developmental approach to education. A lot of times we tend to look at education based on benchmarks and grade levels. My child is this age, they're supposed to know these skills. It works better though if we have all of the underlying skills in place. And so I like to look at it developmentally. Developmentally, where is your child? And I like to think about it in developmental categories. So communication, fine motor skills, social emotional, gross motor skills, cognitive skills, life skills. Where are we at? And let's find that lowest spot. What's missing? And then how can we fill those in? It's like building a house. If you try to build a house and you've got a crooked foundation and 3 of the walls up and you're trying to put the roof on, you are going to have some problems. It's not going to work very well. Kids are the same way. We grow balanced. And when things are out of balance, that's when we start to really struggle. And hey, parents do that too. When parents are out of balance, we get stressed. And when we get stressed, we start to feel really bad. We get sick, we get depressed, we get anxious. Things don't go well. And actually that brings me to one of my best pieces of advice for parents who are choosing to homeschool. There's one thing you really need to make sure that you do. Take time every single day for you. If you don't take time every single day for you, you are going to crash and burn. You can do this, but you have to be willing to take care of yourself first. And even if you didn't get any schoolwork done, you still deserve a break. So remember that. I just gave you permission. So getting back to our developmental approach. The social emotional, that one's really the first one that develops. Children actually really start developing emotional attachments in utero. It happens really early, even before communication. And they can hear and remember what they hear in the second trimester. They've done studies where they will take newborns and play a piece of music that was played a lot while the mom was pregnant, and the baby will recognize it. So these things start really, really early. And so we want to start with those earliest basic skills and make sure that those are in place. So social and emotional, we want to reduce the stress. People don't learn well when they're stressed. And if we get stressed by too much noise or too much light or too many things to do or too many people, reduce the stress or we're not going to grow. Also building positive relationships. And this ties into communication. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So with a child who's nonverbal, one of the things we might do is come into their space and the things they're interested in as much as they want us in there. We're not invading their space, we're joining them with joint attention. And we might sit there and go, ooh, they're coloring, I'm going to color too. Or, you know, you're using a blue color, I'm going to use the blue crayon too, and I'm going to color. I like your picture, it's very pretty. So, you know, we're doing joint attention, we're sharing, we're enjoying each other at the level that they're enjoying. And we're showing that we like the things that they like. Don't you like people who like the things that you like? And when other people show they like the things you like, it makes you feel good. So we want to invest in those. That's the first most important thing. If we can't get those things in place, we're not going to be successful with anything else because that's our foundation. The next step is going to be communication. Social emotional is the beginnings of communication. It's why we want to communicate. And so when we get to communication, we're not talking about verbal. That can be part of it. It's a big part of it. But we can also communicate in other ways. The most basic way that everyone communicates is through behavior. Everyone communicates through behavior. So that's already in place, and we're going to capitalize on that. And then we can expand out and say, let's try to give us more communication options. It doesn't have to be verbal. We can start where we're at. You want something for breakfast? Draw me a picture of what you want for breakfast since you don't have the word. That's fine. That's another start in communication. Sign language can be a wonderful option for some kids. And it really gives a more nuanced language options than pictures or communication devices. So it's my favorite, but you know, quite honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's what works for the kid, what the kid connects with. It's all about what works for them. Sometimes kids create their own therapies. Learning to listen with our eyes. Communication's a lot about listening. So we've got to learn to listen. And the best way to listen to an autistic person is with your eyeballs. Watch what they're doing. Watch what their behavior is telling you. When you become the expert observer on your child, then you're able to interpret what they're trying to tell you. And that gives you a lot of very valuable information. And it's also that first step in developing more communication. So we'll say we've got some communication going. The next thing we're going to want to do, we're not going to jump to letters. We're not going to jump to numbers. We're wanting more communication. We want to make sure we've got comprehension in place too. We're going to sit maybe and look through a picture book together. And we're going to talk about the pictures and point to the different things. Teach some nouns. We're going to read stories. And as they get to where they can communicate more, we're going to say, okay, here's the story. What was it about? Can you tell me? Because when someone's able to tell you what a story is about, they're improving and strengthening their comprehension. There was a theory that came out in the 1970s. It's called the dual coding theory. Now, what's really interesting, nerd here, Charlotte Mason wrote about this 100 years before the research came out. Smart lady. Reason why she's one of my favorites. So the dual coding theory said that we have two visual systems in our mind. One of them is concept imagery. That's when you make movies in your head about a book you're reading. You can't see any pictures, but you make a movie in your head. And that's why when we watch movies and the actor doesn't look the way we pictured the character, sometimes it can annoy us. It annoys me. And then the other kind of imagery is symbol imagery. Symbol imagery is when we see letters and numbers in our head. It's how we do math problems in our head. It's how we learn to spell words. Normal people, when you spell a word, you see the word and you write it down. I'm dyslexic. I don't do that. I have to phonetically spell words, and it's a pain. It's not the best way to do it. Now, one of the best things about research is that about 20 years after research comes out, we figure out what to do about it. So about 20 years after the dual coding theory came out in the 1970s, they came out with some research and some curriculums to help with these kinds of issues. I've got one kid who has a challenge with concept imagery, and I've got another kid who's got a challenge with symbol imagery. These are both of my kids. I had to have opposites, of course, because, you know, if you're going to be homeschooling, why not have to write two completely separate curriculums? Because, you know, that'd be so easy. So one kid did not see any movies in his head. He would read a book and you go, hey, how's the book? He's like, I love it. I'm like, what's it about? He's like, I have no idea. So that's a problem. And the thing is that with concept imagery, those movies you make in your head, memory is encoded visually. That's important. Visuals, pictures, they take up less space because you don't need as many words. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So he wasn't remembering. If you can't remember, you can't comprehend. So it was a real problem. The other one has a delay in symbol imagery. That's dyslexia. A good majority of the dyslexic cases, that's the issue. And so she wasn't seeing words more than 2 or 3 letters. And so this company, Gander Publishing, publishes 2 curriculums. One is called Visualizing and Verbalizing, and one is called Seeing Stars. I do end up recommending that one to a lot of parents. It's kind of expensive, so I only recommend it if it's needed, but it makes a big difference. My son, who didn't see movies in his head, he used the curriculum 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week, and within a year, his listening comprehension had improved 5 grade levels. That's pretty astounding. My daughter's been using the Seeing Stars one I tested her after about 2.5 months, and she had improved 2.5 grade levels in spelling. So when we're able to figure out and pinpoint where that processing challenge is, and we can work to strengthen it by exercising that regularly, the mind is a lot like the body. I like to say a lot of times you have to exercise the muscles of your brain. I mean, your brain doesn't have muscles, but you know, you got to exercise the brain and you got to exercise the body. It keeps us healthy and keeps us balanced. You can't just exercise your right arm and leave the left arm hanging over here out to dry. You've got to exercise them in a balanced way. Same way with the brain. We want to help exercise so that we bring more balance to the brain. Because generally speaking, balanced people tend to be happier people. Think about those famous artists and composers out there who were super, super talented in one area. Usually they had some pretty severe mental health issues. So we want to bring balance to our kids' lives. And so we're looking at what's causing us blockages in developing. So instead of finding new ways to make them learn a new skill that they're not ready for, we're going, what's keeping you from learning this new skill? And how can I help you balance so that it's easier for you to learn this new skill? Because when we have balance, we learn better. And when we learn better, we learn faster and easier. And that's the thing. When I was in school, we used Saxon math and I hated it because it didn't teach the way that I learned. It didn't work for me. I survived, but it wasn't the way I thought. And if we can find the way that works for our kids, they learn fast and easily, and it makes them feel confident because they go, "Ooh, I'm smart." Whereas if they're struggling, they think, what's wrong with me? Not that there's a different way to learn it, because kids' worlds are a lot smaller than ours because they don't have as much life experience. They don't realize just how many different options there are out there. And so when something doesn't work, a lot of times we tend to think, what's wrong with me? Why isn't it working for me? Why can everybody else do it and I can't? It's another positive of homeschooling. There isn't a whole lot of everybody else, and the everybody else that is there is all using different curriculums, so you really don't know that you're not on target where you're supposed to be. And that's the question we have a lot of trouble with. All homeschoolers will say, Mom, what grade am I in? And Mom's like, let me think, hang on. Because we work where we're at, and you'll get where you need to be. And I guess that's really kind of the point. The whole point in educating a child is to help them climb their own ladder of education, that one step at a time, where they're at. And what we're really wanting to do is to set our children's feet in a large room. And we want to slowly expand that room for them, because we want them to have as much room, to have as much joy in their lives as possible. And so we want to give them those opportunities as they're ready to grow their room. We're not looking for a specific size. We're not looking for a specific level. Our goal is to expand that room so that they can find contentment. Because if they can find contentment, they can be successful, whatever that looks like for them. Yeah. And then there's other areas too, like fine motor. That one tends to be a big one for writing. And I will go ahead and say on communication, everything in the brain tends to develop in a specific order, but language is especially ordered in a particular way. All languages in the world use the same kind of grammar. Same basic rules apply, generally speaking. There's some differences, but we all have nouns. We all have verbs. And languages tend to develop in the same pattern as well. We start out by learning to listen and hear sounds and to understand some language. And then we start learning to produce those sounds and to also communicate some ourselves, usually with nouns first. And then as we develop nouns, then we start to add in some verbs and then some describing words. And then once we've gotten to where we're communicating fluently, then we start to develop pre-reading skills. So that's going to be things like sequencing and rhyming. Those are really important skills. If you don't have those skills, you are not ready to read. Things have to go in order. And when we try to go out of order, we get frustrated because it's hard. It's much better when we go in order. So we do the pre-reading skills. Once we've got our pre-reading skills in place, then we're ready to read. And then once we're reading, then we're ready to write. Because why are we going to want to write if we can't read what we wrote? It doesn't make any sense. Now, in your typically developing kids, a lot of times this stuff happens so quickly that it looks like it's happening all at once. One of the advantages of having autistic kids is that you really get to get really good at one stage. I mean, that is an advantage. We get really good at what we're doing because we're there for a while. We also get to thoroughly soak up all of the wonderful things about that stage and really get to enjoy those. It doesn't slip away too fast. So those are some advantages that we do have. And then after writing, then once they're writing fluently and getting thoughts to paper fluently, and that takes a while, then we're ready for grammar. So I'd say it develops in about 3-year increments. The first 3 years, you're really learning to communicate. The next 3, you're really learning your pre-reading skills, more fluent communication, rhyming, sequencing, those kinds of things. And then the next 3 years, you're really developing that reading fluency. And also beginning to develop some writing. But it doesn't really kick off until you've got the reading fluency down. And then you get the writing fluency down. And then after that, then you get into grammar. But it's really, really important to develop fluency with a skill before moving on. Because the brain can only do so much. We have a limited number of resources. And you can't push too hard. That's one of the things. I love the curriculums that I mentioned through Gander Publishing, Visualizing and Verbalizing and Seeing Stars. I think they're really helpful with developing some of those communication gaps that we sometimes see, some of the more advanced ones. But they also have a tendency to push kids a little too hard and do a real intensive method. And so when we push kids too hard and it's too intensive, then they'll start to shut down and stop learning. I had a child that I was working with recently, and they had been doing 3 hours of tutoring with that program every day, 5 days a week. And she had started stuttering, and she really didn't make that much progress. So we switched her to a different tutor who did 15 minutes a day, and she's doing really well now. The stuttering stopped, she's growing, her mom's so pleased with her progress. So we don't have to do a lot, a little, just a little every day, and you've got it. So in our homeschool, we cover a lot of subjects. We do art, we do music, we do math, we do reading, we do grammar, we do science, we do history, we do literature. I'm probably missing half of them now. We do a lot of subjects, but no subject gets covered for very long. They're very short. So it keeps their attention. We get to switch subjects. So we'll go from math to music, or from art to reading. And so we're switching gears. We're using different parts of the brain. We keep it moving. And so we usually don't have too much trouble with attention, as long as we're working at the level that's appropriate for where the child's at. That's the key, finding that level the child's at and working there. And probably the biggest tool that I can tell you is that you need to listen to your child with your eyes. If you're getting kickback schooling them, they're trying to tell you something. And you need to listen and figure out what they're trying to tell you. Never, ever, 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 ever try to push through it. It will not go well for you. It will end up being a battle. And then what was trying to be communicated won't get communicated. So try to listen and see what they're trying to tell you. I tell people all this all the time, because I have to tell myself to remind myself of this. Because when my son is giving me a lot of kickback, it's because he's trying to tell me something. Something's too hard. We're not doing it the right way. It's taking too long. There's something I need to adjust. And if I can find that, we're not going to have any trouble. And it's going to be all right. But it's those little baby steps and finding the order. So anyways, a lot of parents get overwhelmed by that, because they're like, I didn't go to school for this. What do you mean? How am I supposed to do this? And that's part of the reason why I started doing what I do. I consult with families and help them find what those things are, where they need to be, and get them started off on the right foot. And then they email me back and say, hey, we got a problem, I need help. Say, okay, we'll try this instead. And I love getting to do that. I also wrote a guide, and I'm including that discount code in your handout. And it goes through a lot of what I was telling you today. And it takes it even a step further, breaking down these different developmental steps. I found that there was no way I could cram all of that into a small amount. 15 minutes, okay. So someone was asking, when you say 15 minutes, do you just mean 15 minutes a day for learning, or just 15-minute increments throughout the day? So it depends. Usually tops for a young child, you're wanting no more than an hour, maybe an hour and a half of learning a day. My kids are older and have been homeschooling for quite some time, and they have also progressed developmentally. And so at this point, we're up to 2.5 hours. For elementary, you never want more than 3 hours a day total, tops, for homeschooling. Your time's more focused. You aren't having to get in line to go potty. You don't have to go to the lunch counter and stand in line there. You don't have to wait on so-and-so to finish their work. And there's just not as much downtime. It's focused on what they need, and you can get it done fast. So each subject might be 5, 10, 15 minutes tops. When they were really young or developmentally young, either way, it might be 5 minutes. We're going to read a picture book. It takes us 5 minutes. What do you remember from the picture book? Or let's look at this picture book and go through the pictures, and you can retell me the story. Okay, you're going to have the website with all of the links for the guide I wrote. And honestly, I I loved writing the guide, and I thought it was a brilliant way to do things, because there really aren't a lot of great resources out there for special needs families from the perspective of an adult who has special needs. And that's critical, because what actually works and what we think works is sometimes a little different. So I will have those links in your handout. They're at A Charlotte Mason Plenary. And it was the best way that I could find to write all this down, because it's a lot of information, and it's 100 pages. It's a book, pretty much. But yeah, you only need about 15 minutes tops for a subject at any age in elementary, and honestly 5 usually covers it. So for fine motor skills, if we're like developmentally kindergarten level, fine motor skills might be just art. You may just color for 5 minutes. That's okay. We do a little every day, and it will improve over time. Same way with exercising. I mean, you're not going to go to the gym, do 30 minutes of heavy weights, and then not go back for a week. You're going to hurt yourself. And it's the same way with learning. You need to do 5 minutes here, 5 minutes the next day, 5 minutes the day after that. And over time, you're going to see change. And it's going to be awesome. But you've also got to figure out where the weaknesses are. Just because you're having a fine motor problem doesn't mean that it's fine motor weakness. It might be your brain is interpreting spatial information in such a way that it's hard for you to find things in space. And that's a completely different set of issues. So, what if my child is not interested in coloring? Is there another fine motor activity I should introduce them to, or should I push coloring? Go with different types of options. So if they don't like coloring, try painting. If they don't like painting, try chalk. Try chalk painting. You could try rock crayons. Those have been very popular lately with a lot of kids that I've been talking with, because they're these little rock pebbly type things. So they force a pincer grasp, but they also color a lot easier than your typical crayon. So they take a little less pressure. So it's more rewarding. Because if you've got to put all that pressure into it and it's exhausting, well, then that's not going to work. Another strengthening activity would be putty. Sensory putty's great. Play-Doh, beeswax clay. That takes a lot of work. So if they like that, then that's a good one. What else is there? Mazes, dot to dots. I mean, you can do some like worksheet type things, but it depends on the kid. Find what they like and do that, and then try to expand and introduce them to more. We have an autistic son, 18 years old. His brain works very differently. He can remember things very clearly from his life history or past events. However, he's not interested in learning anything new. That's true. That happens sometimes. So one of the things I really love to do, especially with some of the older autistic kids, is I love to get them in the pattern of doing some reading every day, whether they're doing the reading or they're listening to it at the level that's comfortable for them. And then ask them to narrate back, whether they're drawing a picture, telling you something about it, or maybe you go through the book together and you talk about the pictures. It really depends on like the developmental level of the child. But I love this idea of getting kids in the habit of reading, talking about what they read. And I'm using talking loosely because it can be talking, it can be signing, it can be all kinds of things. But that by itself does more for comprehension than anything else. And language comprehension is probably one of the biggest challenges that we've got to address for learning. Because if comprehension is low, we're not making progress with any cognitive skills whatsoever. And cognitive skills are the bulk of what we teach in schools. So improving comprehension is really important. It also really helps with auditory processing skills, especially if you use a lot of audiobooks with different narrators, and especially if you get some bad narrators. Because you have to learn to listen to the different voices and the different accents. And by doing that regularly, it improves it strengthens those neural pathways in the brain, those auditory processing pathways. And they actually get a lot better. Both of my kids have auditory processing, and so do I, but they process better than I do. And I guarantee you it is because of all the audiobooks and the narrating. It makes a huge difference. Narrating is when we talk about what the story was about. You know, we do that a lot when we read a book that we like. We say, hey, I read this great book, or I saw this great show. Let me tell you all about it. And so encouraging more of that is very, very helpful. He can tell instantly the day of any date, even 20 years back, more faster than the computer. Yes. All right, that's the case in some instances. And it depends. It's not always the same processing challenge. I think most of the time, I don't know. It depends. Kids can have the same symptoms, but it can be caused by different processing problems. So some kids who are really good at remembering dates and things like that have more of a challenge with spatial processing and comprehension type skills. Other kids, though, with them it's the opposite. They have more of a visual memory, but they have challenges with the more like symbol processing type things. And the anxiety is huge also with that, because that's like one of the reasons why we don't like learning new things. We get to be in control and it makes us feel a little bit more secure. So sometimes a way of helping people break out of some of that is, one, addressing the anxiety. Lots of coping strategies to help with that. I personally love yoga. That's one of my favorites. But aside from that, also introducing a tiny bit. We're going to listen to 5 minutes of something new, but it's something that's kind of related. Okay, great, we did that. We've done it, not too bad. And so start out just a little bit. But cannot solve simple addition. Okay, yes. So if we can't solve simple addition, usually the reason is because there is some kind of a developmental step that has not been caught before. Something is missing in the development that is blocking it. So what we've got to do is figure out what it is and how to unblock it. Honestly, I would suspect, given all of that, it could be spatial. A lot of times when we see math challenges and not wanting to do new things, a lot of times that can be a spatial processing issue. Hard to say for sure, just because each kid's different, but that would be my gut guess. And spatial processing issues causes a lot of issues with learning. You can be really fantastic sometimes at maybe reading, or you can be really fantastic at like calendars, for instance, maps, but it can cause some real havoc with comprehension and math sometimes, especially, but each one's different. So yeah, that's the thing. You've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So anyways, I'm gonna completely open it up to any questions y'all might have. That's kind of a good overview. It's really hard to pin it down to, oh, your child's autistic, do this, or your child's dyslexic, do this, or your child's dysgraphic, do this, because each one has different subtypes. It's one of the reasons why when I talk with people, I recommend the guide I wrote, just because I put a lot of links to different books that teach you about different things in there, and I've just found it's the easiest way to do it. Because kids are complicated. I don't know if y'all noticed this or not yet.
Amy, I'm not a parent, but I definitely can say, yes, they are complicated. I don't know how to, I don't want to butcher her name. The lady, I believe, who was talking about her son asked a follow-up question: how can we help him to culture his strengths? So given that, you kind of addressed that it may be a spatial issue, what can the parents do, or who should they consult to kind of help with that deficit, so to speak?
So I like to use strengths, and I like to encourage strengths. But with that said, I do not like to focus only on strengths, because like I was saying, kids can be out of balance. And if we've got a strength way up here and our weakness is here, and we focus only on the strength, it's going to go up and it's going to make this gap bigger. And that's a problem, because then we're more out of balance than we were before. So we don't want to dismiss or not appreciate the things that our kids love. We want to definitely love that they love that, and we want to encourage them. But at the same time, we also want to use those strengths to help strengthen their weaker areas, to close this gap. Even if we just close it a little bit, we've closed it a little bit, and that helps us be more balanced than we were before. And so I think the biggest way to help him appreciate his strengths is just loving and appreciating what he loves and helping him with that. Now, with the spatial areas, I suspect it's spatial. And if that is the case, then I would probably look at Gander Publishing and maybe Visualizing and Verbalizing. I knew that my son couldn't picture things in his mind because we had a conversation about it, because we discussed this years later. I was late figuring it all out. If I had figured this out a long time ago, it really would have been nice, because we had a lot of frustration in the meantime, because mom thinks in pictures and son does not. So there was a lot of miscommunication all the time. You got to be aware of how you think and also how your kid thinks, and realize that sometimes there's just some miscommunication going on. But visualizing and verbalizing made a huge difference for him. And it really did help with some of the spatial stuff. The other thing with spatial is getting experience with fine motor, gross motor, video games even. That's hand-eye coordination in a totally different way. The more experience you get with different ways of interacting with your environment, the more those neural pathways will strengthen over time. It's not an easy fix, it's not a short fix, but it will help. So when I talked to my son about seeing pictures in his head, this was after he had language. And he was older, and man, we had a lot of frustrations. But I said, do you make movies in your head? Like when I read a book, I see a whole movie inside my head. And he just looks at me like I'm the strangest person in the world. He says, no, do you? And I'm like, yeah, all the time. He's like, can you teach me how to do that? I'm like, we're going to figure that out, buddy. And we did. And he can now do much better. It's definitely still not his strength area, but we have closed more of that gap. And that helps with other learning. It helps him to learn other things too, and helps him to be able to communicate better, and also to learn socially too. Yes. You agree the video games may help as they have visual effects. I'm in a group of people with nonverbal learning disability, and that is for people who have a disability in spatial processing. It's a disability in things that aren't verbal. And I was talking with some of the adults, and a couple of them like video games. Some of them just don't like it. They don't want anything to do with them. But some of them like them. And one of the guys said especially that he thought playing video games had been what had enabled him to be able to learn to drive. Because some people who have spatial challenges feel very uncomfortable driving, because it's very dangerous when you don't process things in space correctly and you're driving this giant vehicle. So he felt like it had made a huge difference. And I've definitely seen improvements in my son's processing. It does not improve processing in all areas, because spatial processing involves lots of different types of inputs. So that's why more varied inputs tend to help. So now someone asked.
So there's another question, Amy.
Okay.
So same in the mind of pictures in the mind. This person asked, how did you know that your child couldn't picture things in their mind? And you kind of already answered that. But specifically for this child, they're not able to communicate vocally yet. And that's kind of an issue. So if that is the issue, how does a parent kind of determine that? And then how does that parent support that? Because the child's not able to vocally communicate back, hey, I don't see pictures, or I see pictures, that sort of thing.
So each one's different, obviously. I say this a lot. But it depends on the kid. So my son is a very unique case. There's a small number of autistic kids that learn to read naturally, like they teach themselves to read. It's called hyperlexia. And when he turned 2, we were driving down the road and he read a sign. And all of a sudden I realized, oh shoot, this child can read, which scared me to death because I'm dyslexic and I thought, what am I going to do with this kid? So for him, we used that as a strength to help with communication. And once we strengthened communication, then we were able to work on the comprehension. However, each child's different, and that's a very rare case. So for a lot of kids, the first thing that I recommend is working on improving communication. Usually when a child doesn't see movies in their head, you can tell because they're terrible at following instructions if they understand language. Awful. Because they can't remember anything because they didn't make a picture of it in their head. Spatial issues especially. I used to stand right in front of my son when he was crawling, and he wanted to get to something that was behind me, but he could never figure out to go around. He'd just keep banging his head into my legs. He was also incredibly klutzy. So those are some of the things that were kind of signs. There is a program through Gander Publishing, I think it's called the Talkies, and it is for kids that aren't really communicating so much yet. It's not the first thing I would try. I'd start honestly with using sign language and pictures and talking about pictures and joint attention. I'd start there. But you could look into that and see if it looks like a fit for your kid. One of the things I always say is, if mom says something's not right, then we look until we find it. I had an immunologist tell me that one time, and I loved him to death because not many people had told me that. And I appreciated that he understood that I knew my kids better than anybody else. You know your kids better than anybody else. I get a snapshot from even parents that I work with when I'm testing. It's still a snapshot. So whatever you see, that's what's most important. And if you can look at it and you go, I think this might work, listen to it. Listen to that gut feeling. Mom gut feelings are there for a reason. Start with communication though.
For sure. So one last question, and then it's kind of nearing our time. But on the vein of communication, so if you, because that's like the first developmental stage that you talked about, that basically work on that and then begin adding some of those like more academic pieces. If you have a child who is maybe demonstrating some vocal abilities, but is not consistent and they're not echoically responding, so they're not repeating the words after you, but they're also not seemingly really interested in pictures, that sort of thing. How do you go about strengthening that communication level?
What would be your strategies? Okay. You listen with your eyes, and then you use whatever tools you've got available to you. And honestly, usually when I talk to parents, I tell them, I want you to try it all. Try it all. See what'll work. Let's find something that will work, you know? So we'll try pictures, and not necessarily picture exchange communication in the formal way, but, you know, using a picture, you can hand the child a picture of, you know, whatever they want, and then get them to hand it to you, and then you get them what they want. We did that with sign language with my daughter, and she took to it great. And it was wonderful because she'd want a cookie maybe. And I'd say and sign for her with her hands, I want a cookie. And as soon as I helped her do that, she got it. So it wasn't saying you can't have it until you do it the way I want you to. It was, here, let me help you. I'm trying to show you that when you do this, you get this. And that does work for a lot of kids. If you've got a kid who doesn't see movies in their head, they probably don't understand if then, and that is a problem. So that will not work. Being able to see pictures is very important to understanding if and then. So in that case, that's honestly going to be your most challenging case as far as language development goes, because if then is how we learn. With my son, writing things down, and sometimes even with kids that aren't highly verbal, sometimes I'll do pictures with the words written under them. So yeah, just exploring what works for that kid, using what they present you with. A lot of times they'll find it for you, but we've got to listen and watch with those eyes. My daughter developed her own therapy. She had a little doll and she called it Girl Doll once she had language. And Girl Doll went everywhere we went and did everything we did. Only Girl Doll was not her doll. Girl Doll was my child. So I was supposed to get Girl Doll dressed every morning and brush Girl Doll's teeth and put Girl Doll at dinner with us and get Girl Doll ready for bed. So I had an extra child. And then my daughter decided she needed one for her brother too. So I ended up with 4 children to take care of at the same time. But this was her therapy. It was her way of going out into the world and doing things because she'd have Girl Doll do it first. And so sometimes if we will watch our kids and listen, they'll give us the clues. It's about developing that relationship. It all comes back to relationship and connection. If you can do that, that's the most important thing. And, you know, it doesn't matter where you end up. It's about the relationship. As long as you've got that good, positive relationship, it doesn't matter where you're going because you're doing it together. So, anyways.
As you said, having that baby, which was
That's
like
right.
the way we started. So I want to thank you so much, Amy, for joining us this evening, for sharing tips, strategies, talking to us about the benefits of homeschooling, and just for me, I feel like, despite the fact that I don't have kids, but, you know, I work with a lot of families, it's enriching to know that, hey, there's developmental stages, there's a way to go about it. And I feel like there's a lot of things I learned tonight that I will incorporate in my ABA practice. So thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge. We are going to conclude now, but if you are want to ask a few more questions, I think Amy is probably more than willing to stay on for a little bit. But for anybody who's ready to say, hey, I'm going to have a good night, I'm going to leave now, definitely you are free to leave, but we thank not that I'm not kicking you out, but you're free to leave. But I do thank everyone for joining us this evening. Amy's developmental guide, as well as a promo code, will be sent out to you, and as well as a feedback survey, just because we want to learn more about, did you find this topic interesting? Is there another topic that you would like to explore? And you know, does the time work? Because I know it's about 7 p.m. Eastern time. Would you have preferred for it to be a little bit later because you have children that may need to go to bed? So kind of let us know, give us feedback. Those of you who've asked questions, I think Amy's okay with just answering them real quick. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. I have one quick question, and then there's a question in the chat from the Q&A. The question is, have you studied speech therapist James McDonald from Ohio? You sound similar to him.
I haven't, but I kind of think that, I like to say this about good books too. If you found something that's really good, then you'll find a lot of other people who also think it's really good. So usually when I find some other people who are, you know, thinking along the same lines, I'm like, okay, we've been influenced by some of the same things. Okay, so let's see, I think in the chat, my 18,
my 18-year-old son used to watch videos on Horror Henry and liked it very much. Later, he was so addicted on this specific video that he used the Horror Henry character as a role model and applied it in his daily, everyday life.
Yeah. And, you know, kids find their own therapies, and sometimes it's not what you would have picked or thought, but that's okay. They're trying to help us. We just have to figure out how to listen with our eyes, and we're not used to listening with our eyes as adults because we're used to communicating verbally. And so making that shift is sometimes a bit of a challenge.
Yes.
So,
like I said, I think I personally have just like learned a lot because again, coming from that standardized professional stance, and you probably see this with school psychology, what happens is you're so standardized. It all has to be like this assessment, this tool. You don't follow it, insurance companies don't pay you, school gets mad at you. The systems, as you were talking earlier, they don't fit that mold that, you know, and your child, you know, it's not that, hey, your child's broken. That's not what it is. Your child just doesn't fit that mold. And we need to teach them, and not just teach them, teach everybody around how to accommodate their mold, but then also figure out what is their mold telling us. No, I definitely think that there's a lot to take away and a lot to apply.
And that's the weakness, I think, of having a systems approach in some ways, because we can get so hung up on our data that we forget that we're looking at a person, and a person can't be quantified. A person is qualitative. They have qualities.
Yes.
So
no, for sure. As you said,
numbers are useful. They're a tool.
Yes,
but
and you know,
you can't sum up a person with numbers.
Exactly. And I can't say that I haven't found some of these standardized tools useful. It has been, because it's been like a guiding for me in some way, you know. However, the problem is when your child, and I'll even say sometimes for my clients, when they don't fit that mold, I then try to take them and fit the mold. That's the problem.
Right.
So,
The data is a tool to gather more information. It's not going to give you the answers. We have to kind of be the detective, take those numbers and the data we're able to collect and kind of go, okay, what kind of pattern am I seeing? And that's what I love about what I do, is I tend to think in patterns. And so I look at all this data I collect on a kid and I go, okay, where's the pattern? There's a pattern here somewhere. There's a pattern where something's missing. We've got to find that thing that's missing. Where is it?
And I definitely think that's where, with behavior analysis in my field, ABA, like in our title, it says analysis. And I think that analysis parts get lost sometimes because you're just on the go, and you forget that, hey, no, I need to take all the documents, lay them on top of each other, and actually review and see, okay, where, you know, lack of better terms, where's the hole in the overlap? Because then you can go and target it, you know, and see how you can, you know, make that gap smaller, eliminate it if possible, but if not, you know, at least, you know, put that accommodation support in there.
Right. Like academically speaking, you know, if you see low reading skills and low spelling and low math, I'm probably going to go, I bet you this kid has a symbol processing problem. Because that's the pattern that I see when I see kids with symbol processing pattern issues. So, yeah, you gotta look for what those clues are and then figure out what those patterns are telling you. So,
and once you learn the patterns, like, it kind of brings me back to remembering when you're like in 3rd grade and you're beginning that double digits. When you begin the double digits, what you start doing is you use your fingers, you know, to count. And you know, you're counting on your fingers, but as you get older, you end up not needing it, more so because we use calculators, let's be very honest. But you use your fingers for counting. And I think that part of that is what happens, you know, with the kid as you're growing, like, is just putting in that support, that accommodation. What is it that you need in order to understand? So
another question.
Yeah,
we are looking to seek help from a cognitive behavioral analyst for our 18-year-old son. Do you have any recommendation? I always say you should find the therapist that your kid likes. If they don't like them, don't see them. Because if they don't like them, then either there's something wrong with them, because kids are sometimes a good judge of character, or they just don't connect with that therapist. And that's okay. It's nothing personal. It's different people connect with different people. So definitely that. Make sure it's somebody who sees the child as a person.
Yes.
And somebody who is willing to listen to the child. Well, and kind of reaching adulthood here, because we're talking 18 now. But a lot of times, because we as parents are the ones paying the bill, people tend to listen to us a little bit more because we're the ones paying the bill. But as the parent and the advocate, what you want to do is get that person you're paying to focus their attention on what the child thinks. Because that's going to help the therapist be the most successful. Because it's about the kid doing the work, not us. And we're not trying to get them to be a particular way. We're helping them to be the best them that they can be. And being the best them that they can be may look very different from what we think. So listening, so important.
One more Q&A, and then we'll definitely wrap up. So what are your thoughts for, I could talk about this forever, as you can see. What are your thoughts for taking your child to therapy and clinics versus just homeschooling and providing the therapy yourself? For example, as a parent, you learn the therapy and you're the therapist.
It depends on the kid. It also depends on what the issue is specifically. But I will say, when my kids were small, we did do speech therapy, where I took them in. We actually did several therapies, but the speech was especially useful because I think in pictures, not words. And so it was very difficult for me to really totally guide them by myself. But I did much prefer working with therapists who were willing to work with me. If I found a therapist who saw me as their team member and I saw them as my team member, we got a lot more done, because that therapist was really focusing on teaching me to be a better parent. And those are the kinds of people you want to work with. But honestly, once you start homeschooling, a lot of times, there are a lot of therapies that you can drop and work on at home. But it depends on the child and the person and what you have access to. Those are the key things. We want to keep using things that are working for us. We want to keep using resources that work for us. But there are a lot of things you can do at home to support language development, fine motor development. So I'm a pretty big fan of that. You can do a lot at home. Just be aware of yourself as the parent. Where are your strengths and weaknesses? What are you going to want to outsource? We outsource voice lessons and music lessons, mostly because I can play, but there's a limit to what mom can do. So everybody outsources something. You've just got to decide what those things are going to be that you're going to outsource. Is it going to be something you outsource where you take the child somewhere? Is it going to be something you outsource where you bring in a video or a book or something like that? But you are going to outsource something, because, we can be a one-man show to a degree, but at the end of the day, mama needs a break sometimes.
I like one-man shows. However, at the same time too, you get burnt. The other part is the burnt out piece that I see sometimes. And so,
yes, moms can do wonderful things, and that's fantastic. But also realize you have tools available, and be willing to use them when you want to use them. It's just a weighing of cost benefit.
For sure.
So I fully believe, though, parents can do, just about anything that they want to, if they're willing, because y'all do amazing stuff every day. So.
Well, you are amazing. This is the feedback. You are amazing. and you've made one of my parents feel very encouraged from our discussion tonight. So God bless you.
I am so glad. And, you know, if y'all want to find me, you got questions for me, let me know. I'm going to send out the handout and it'll have all of that on there where you can reach me.
Okay.
I answer questions all the time for parents. I run a Facebook group actually where I just answer questions. They aren't necessarily my clients. It's just a free support group.
Is that link in what you'll be sending?
I'm going to put it in there. Yes. It's called Special Needs Homeschooling the Charlotte Mason Way.
Oh, okay.
Pretty easy.
Yeah, you know, it's the way.
Yeah, it's the way. Yeah.
Again, thank you so much, Amy. This was great. Again, learned so much from you. And I think all the parents who are here have also learned so much from you as well. So,
well, an honor getting to be with you guys, and
yes.
I've really enjoyed getting to know you better.
Aww.
And getting to speak with y'all's group, because I think y'all have a lot of very positive ideas about interacting with children as people and helping to use what they've got, and I think that's great. So.
Yes. I appreciate you. So now that we're like best friends, we will be doing this again.
That's awesome.
Yay! I'm assuming like my parents will be very excited about that. So, yeah. So with that being said, guys, this is the wrap up. I've said this like 3 times now. Okay, so now this is the end. We love you all. Have a great night. And stay tuned, please. Well, not stay tuned now. Do reply to the feedback survey, because we really want to know how we can help and support our parents more. And also too, if you haven't already, contact Caliber. I'd love to chat with you and just learn more about you and your family. So with that being said, have a good night.
Thank y'all.
No problem. You have a good